When I tell you this like summertime skin tone differential struggle is real, it's real. Like, look at how different these skin tones are. This is like, my makeup is super pale and then my skin is super brown, and Florida girl problems. Hola y'all, welcome back to my channel. You are watching Shelly Flowers Reads and Writes, where I talk about all things related to reading and writing. I am Michelle Flores, and today's video is some really exciting news. So in a very strange turn of events, I have surpassed my reading goal for the year. Yay! So at the start of this year, I wanted to read 52 books by the end of the year. This was my same goal for last year, but I only got to about 45 books. This year I smashed the goal. I read 52 books by the middle of July. So I wanted to talk about some goals that I had with my reading and some ways that I want to reshape that reading in particular. I will also say that because of the Sealy challenge, my goal is going to increase a lot, and I don't know if I'll have to make another one of these videos in a few months, but we'll see. I'm still going to go for it. All right, so like I said before, my original goal for the year was to read 52 books. I am now changing this goal to be 90 books for the year. This will increase the total amount of books that I need read to 38 if I'm doing my math right. And I want to break it down even further and talk about some of the specificities within that goal that I would like to meet before the end of the year, if that's even possible. Okay. So first I want to talk about ethnic breakdown of authors. I am someone who actively tries to read as diversely as possible, but I also recognize that a lot of texts that I have access to might not be written by authors of color. So I wanted to take a minute to just break down what the ethnicities are and what I can do to, push for my goal. I had this sort of unwritten goal that at least 75% of the books I read this year would be by authors of color. I didn't want to break it down even further because identity can get really complex. I'm thinking especially as someone who reads a lot from Latinx authors, that's a really difficult thing to categorize because Latinx identity is not a monolith, and you can be Black in Latinx, Asian in Latinx, white in Latinx, indigenous, and you might not identify as Latinx, but you were born in a Latin American country because your people were colonized. So it's one of those things where I also recognize the problematic sentiment behind Latinidad, and I figured for this first go around, I'm just gonna keep it at authors of color versus white authors. So as of right now, I have read 25 books by white authors and 27 books by authors of color. I'm not really happy with that. I thought I was doing a lot better in that regard, and it turns out I'm not. So I need to do better. And one of the ways that I plan on doing better is to prioritize any books that are written by authors of color on my TBR. So that is definitely my goal, especially with the Sealy challenge, although I do recognize that a lot of the books that are still on my TBR shelf tend to be books written by white authors, and they tend to be more canonized books, if you will, books that have been accepted as being like high literature. Again, things that I'm not that interested in reading. So we'll see. Okay, next we have genre breakdown. So this was really interesting. In the beginning of the year, I kind of had this idea of having 30% of my books that I've read be poetry, the other 30% be fiction, another 30% as nonfiction, and then the last 10% to kind of just be any sort of miscellaneous or mixed media form of book. For example, graphic novels or art books or anything like that where you can't put it into a specific category. I would also put novels in verse in this category because I think novels in verse straddle that line between fiction and poetry, and so I don't think it's fair to lump them into the same category as fiction and poetry. Which, if you're looking behind me, you can probably see a couple of novels in verse in my poetry section of my bookcase. I plan on changing that, and you'll see that happen in a different video. In reality, it turns out that I have read I have read 18 fiction books this year, which brings me to a total of 35% fiction. That's really not that bad, and a little bit more than I was expecting, but pretty close to what my goal is. The next category is poetry, and I've only read 10 books of poetry this year. I've got to say, this one took me by surprise. I thought I was reading more poetry, and then I realized I was calculating 2 novels in verse and a mixed media book in that. So that's why this percentage is actually at 19% instead of the 30% that I was thinking. And then next we have nonfiction. So I've read 15 nonfiction books this year. I was really surprised about this because a few years ago I read maybe 1 nonfiction book a year. So this is telling me that I am now reading 29% nonfiction books, and that's great, but I'm wondering what's going on with poetry. It's kind of strange that poetry is so low. That being said, the Sealy Challenge is coming up, and I know my poetry percentage is about to skyrocket, so we will see a big increase with that. Then I read 2 mixed media books this year, so that brings me to a total of 4% mixed media. And I read 5 manga or graphic novels this year, so that brings me to another total of 10% manga or graphic novels. And lastly, I read 2 novels in verse, so that brings me to 4% novels in verse. So in total, I've got about 18% for miscellaneous, which I'm actually okay with. I think, you know, I'm getting a little bit nitpicky with some of these categories, but given that a lot of these books, I'd say about 3 of the miscellaneous books, I would also categorize as poetry, that makes me feel a little bit better about the percentage breakdown. So my goal with this still hasn't changed. I want to make sure I'm kind of at an even split between fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. And I want to make sure I'm also including a lot more mixed media, manga, graphic novel types of books. I'd also like to read more novels in verse because I find that's a genre that I actually really love. And now that I see more and more books are coming out that are in this style, I would like to partake in them more. There's some other random goals that I have that I didn't know how to categorize and I didn't want to do percentages for. These were just unwritten rules that I now want to write down and make them actual factual goals that I can accomplish before the end of the year because I've already kind of started the process. So goal number 1 was to read 3 books in Spanish. I have already read 2 books in Spanish. Technically, those books don't count towards my Goodreads goal, so if we want to get technical about things, I have read 54 books this year, but since I couldn't put them on Goodreads, I didn't count them for the purposes of the data that I'm using in this video. But in terms of reading books in Spanish, I'm definitely counting them, and I would like to read another book in Spanish. Now, interestingly enough, I listen to Radio Ambulante, which is a NPR Spanish language podcast, and I understand most of the things that that podcast presents. So I'm thinking I might make my 3rd book an audiobook because I can easily download it, and I listen to audiobooks every day that I walk. I try to walk for like an hour, hour and a half a day, and I think that would be a really easy way for me to accomplish that goal. The next goal that I have is to read 5 teacher books this year. I have already read 1 teacher book, and I'm in the middle of reading another, so I have a few teacher books left on my TBR shelf that I could easily pick up and finish before the end of the year. And I think that'll be just an overall helpful goal for me to accomplish before the school year ends, because Lord knows I'm gonna need all the advice and all the ideas to get through this chaotic school year. Right, the last unofficial but now official goal that I have for myself is to read 5 writing craft books for the year. I've already read 1. It is by far my favorite craft book for writing I've ever read in my entire life, but that was focused in poetry. I would like to read some fiction craft books because I'm in the middle of writing a YA novel and I'm struggling because I've never done this before, and I know that there could be techniques that I could be pulling from and that I'm just not doing. Yeah, your girl needs help, and books are the way that I can do that. I also want to give a quick shout out to Lacelle Sambury because she did a Q&A about world building that was so helpful to me. So it's not a craft book, but if she ever were to write one, I would read it, even if it was just like a craft memoir. I don't know if that's a thing. On Writing by Stephen King is kind of like a craft memoir, right? It's not super didactic and it's more about his life, but it also gives really good writing advice. So I digress. Anyway, in summation, I've read 52, technically 54 books this year. My goal is to now read 90 books. However, given that the Sealy Challenge is happening in the month of August, I feel like I might need to increase that number of books. We'll see. For now, I am going to wrap this video up. So if you like what you see, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. I post videos every Wednesday and Sunday, sometimes Friday. If you'd like to buy my current chapbook, Gwentles from the Swamp, you can find it in the link down below. If you'd like to pre-order my new chapbook coming out in 2021, you can also find the pre-order link down in the description below. You can also find me on pretty much every single social media platform as @ShellyFlowers. All right, ciao y'all.